Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. We're here at Pulaski Elementary School on the west side of Wilmington, just above what's commonly known as the neighborhood of Hedgeville. We're also joined by Representative Sherry Dorsey Walker, who represents this district, I assume. I know she covers this area. Tonight we're here for a public town hall meeting. This is our first of a series of 4 that we'll be doing over the next several weeks. Oh, by the way, I'm Governor John Carney, in case you didn't recognize me. With my mask on, I run into people on the street all the time, and they do a double take, and they look at me and said, "Are you the governor?" I said, "Yeah, that's me." So it's great that we have a number of folks who've joined us here at Pulaski Auditorium, most of which are representatives from Christina School District. Dan Shelton, we appreciate you being here as well, and your team. Thanks for joining us. You've seen this presentation before. Jim Simmons is with us, who's the director of the Office of Equity in the Department of Education. He'll run through a quick slideshow to present and talk about our Wilmington Learning Collaborative, which is our proposal to really bring together the 3 school districts that represent the city of Wilmington. Leaving out Colonial, they have a very, very small piece of the city in a collaborative effort to improve the educational opportunities for the children in our city, and to be possibly a stepping stone for ideas that are being developed through the Reading Commission. So we're really excited about the prospects of bringing greater focus to our students who live here in the city and the unique problems that they face, as well as additional resources, which we've started to bring even prior to this with our relationship with Christina School District alone in the memorandum of understanding that we have with the district and with the teachers in the district, something that we want to extend to the 2 other districts in the city. We have met now with each of the 3 school boards. Last night we met with Brandywine School Board for the 2nd time. We've met with Christina School Board twice, and they've had a separate working workshop, I guess, to go over the proposal and answer various questions. We've also met with Red Clay and expect to have another meeting with them and additional meetings for decisions as to whether to engage in a process of developing MOUs with the state and among the 3 districts, again, to provide focus and additional resources here in the city with a lot of local kind of control and engagement and a lot of input from the teachers in the 3 districts. We've also met in a Zoom format with teacher groups. In fact, the last one with all the teachers from Harlan Elementary, and we've met with teacher leaders as well, and we have representatives here in the Pulaski Auditorium tonight. We're also joined by folks that are coming to us on Facebook Live and YouTube, so welcome here into the auditorium. We've got Pam here and Alexandra, who are going to be our sign language experts for the deaf and hard of hearing. And we're really here to hear from you, parents and families here on the west side of Wilmington, about the ideas, questions that you might have. We had a really informative full day, almost full day session, Zoom session with 4 other cities and school districts across the country that employ this approach. And I know a lot of questions were answered, a lot of questions were asked, and a lot of questions were answered. And I think it was a really good way to understand how this kind of approach actually works in practice. I myself joined a group of us 3 or 4 years ago when we went up to Springfield, Massachusetts, to see how it worked up there, and we were very impressed with what we saw. So tonight is about the folks in this neighborhood, this side of town. We got 3 more public meetings. I have been knocking on the doors. We have a group that knocked doors here a Saturday ago, engaging folks, parents, kids. We saw a lot of kids out on their bicycles that day. It was a beautiful day. And we're going to continue to do that. We have a team doing that on the north side. And hopefully this weekend I'll be doing some door knocking up there as well, really to reach out and hear from people and frankly to promote what we think is a better way of addressing the educational needs of our children. And because it's locally focused, engages and empowers teachers, provides extra resources, and again, that collaboration among the three school districts. So that, in terms of setting the table, I'm going to turn it over to Jim Simmons, who is our Director of Equity, and he's going to run us through the slide presentation. Then we're going to open it up to questions, comments, advice, you name it. We take it all. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor, and thank you, Dan, and the Christina School District for hosting us. I'm going to go through a series of slides that talk about this concept, it's a framework that we're calling the Wilmington Learning Collaborative. And what we've done is actually taken, as the Governor said, looked at some different models across the country, and instead of adopting them, we've adapted them to retrofit them to fit into the city of Wilmington, which is unique. And if you know anything about our education in the city of Wilmington, you know it's unique in many ways. So on the screen behind me is a few of the current challenges that we face in education in general, and they're accentuated when we look at education in the city. Wilmington is divided, if you include high school piece, 5 different districts that are overseeing different parts of the city, which cause students to have the option of being exposed to multiple district governance structures in maybe the course of their educational career, sometimes even a year. I always tell the story about when I was the principal at Mount Pleasant High School. 30th Street was the dividing line between Brandywine School District and Red Clay, and oftentimes I would lose a student in the middle of the year because their family would move 1 or 2 blocks and then now have to relocate to Dixon High School. Byron Murphy and I, who was the principal at the time, would always call each other and say, hey, you're getting or you're receiving a student, let's look out for them and try to wrap our arms around that kid or that student and that family as they were transitioning to a different environment, many times with different friends and peers, certainly different teachers and administrators. And so it was always good for us to welcome that kid and to say, hey, Mr. Murphy called me and he told me all about you. You're a great kid. We want to welcome you in with open arms. But is that a fair situation to put me and or that family in, right? We know inside the city we have some buildings that need some refurbishing. We certainly have committed, meaning the state, to committing to fixing up those buildings. We're here at Pulaski while Bayard is being renovated. We're building a new school on the east side to replace the Bancroft School, and we've repurposed Stubbs to become a dual generation center. In the next slide, I'll talk in a little bit more detail about the retention rates for schools in the city and the impact that low retention rate has, and we're hoping that this framework will give us an opportunity to correct those retention rates so that teachers stay a little bit longer. All of those things, plus others, lead to high absenteeism and low achievement rate for students. If you look at the slide behind me, the data shows that the state average for teachers who remain in the same building over a 3-year span is roughly 66%. All the schools listed are the schools in the city, within the city limits. All of them are below that state average. I don't want to pick on any particular school, but if you think about the fact that over a course of 3 years, less than 50% of those teachers are there 3 years later. Here's what that means to a principal like myself. I see Mr. Cahoon in the audience, is that now he has to redo professional development for his staff every 3 years. Curriculum, staff don't have the opportunity to become comfortable with the curriculum because they're relearning over the course of 3 years. 50% or higher of them are relearning that curriculum. The other piece is why we're here tonight, to talk about family engagement. When you have a staff that's currently or consistently being overturned, you as family members don't have the opportunity to build that rapport. When I was a teacher long time ago, I knew that there were times where I taught brother, sister, cousin, family members, so they knew who I was in the building. I could say to them, just ask your brothers and sisters whether I'm fair or unfair. Believe it or not, there were times that I even taught children of former students, which I did start teaching when I was 12, so I was relatively young. So that's important when we talk about that. So here's what this structure or this framework looks like. We're asking the big three, but we're certainly not excluding anyone. So that big three would be Brandywine, Christina, and Red Clay School District, to partner with us, to join with us, to collaborate with us around improving educational outcomes and some of those challenges in that earlier slide to fix education for the students who reside in the city. I think it's important for everyone to hear this, to me, is not a blame game. We're not pointing fingers and saying someone's not doing. What we're saying is that it's a capacity issue, and we're going to use this framework to create some additional capacity for you by building on the screen a trustee board that will be hyper-focused on the city, having a small staff would oversee the day-to-day operations, but of that staff, there would be members from the districts that the schools reside in that would still be able to report back to those current districts. So of all three, hopefully, that they decide to join. The other thing I think is important that we mention is this is not a state takeover by any imagination. We're going to partner with those cooperating districts to build MOUs to agree on what facets of authority that this collaborative would oversee and ones that they don't want us to oversee. So we're going to work together to create that MOU, that memorandum of understanding, so we're all on the same page. What could it look like? I think there's lots of things. We can talk about who participates. It's a coalition of the willing. We don't want this to be something that we mandate. We're certainly taking feedback. I think we're in our 80th plus meeting trying to garner feedback and support, answer questions, so that this isn't something that's a top-down model, but a bottom-up. We've spent a lot of time in education and probably other fields where we do a lot of things to and for people and not enough things with people. This is something that we want to do with the parents, the families, the students, the community, so that they have some input into what we're doing. We think this gives us an opportunity to be more flexible with hiring, flexible with how we use staff, flexible around curriculum. I was fortunate enough to be the principal prior to PLCs, or professional learning communities, being mandated by the state some years ago, and I saw the impact it had around our curriculum when our entire science department met together to talk about different things that impacted science in this case, or math or ELA or what have you. This gives us an opportunity to not only have PLCs around curriculum, but PLCs around different districts and talk about best practices and share those ideas out with each other. So it gives us a lot of opportunity to do exactly what the title says, be collaborative. And so I think that's important for us to talk about as well. I think I mentioned earlier, I want to make sure I remind myself to say it. Again, this is not a takeover. All the schools will remain in the districts that they currently reside in. We're not taking them out of their districts, taking them away from their districts. They stay in their district. We're just creating this partnership for them to collaborate together. We talk about some additional investments. I talked about potentially adding the same curriculum or common curriculum. If, in fact, we decide as a collaborative that that would take place, the state is willing to take on that additional investment around curriculum. We talk about incentives and different things that we could use to have staff stay and remain, to raise that retention rate in the city. We want to increase pre-K seats. I actually argue and believe that that's the most important thing we can do. If we can send students, 3- and 4-year-olds, to kindergarten better prepared, then they're going to be better prepared for first grade, second grade, third grade. We've got to address this from the very beginning, trying to get them in the middle. Not that we won't do that, but I think if we can do that in the beginning, it goes a long way for us. We also talked about the potential of extending the school year, school day. Let me be clear, that doesn't mean that teachers who are already working, grinding through the day, especially in the post-COVID or midst of COVID, the different struggles that they're dealing with, not asking them to extend their day. What we're saying is provide different opportunities, whether it's community-based organizations, nonprofit organizations coming in and supporting kids with enrichment opportunities. I told this story, and it's a little eccentric, but I had a chance years ago to go to Italy and visit the Colosseum. One of my top 5 movies is The Gladiator, and every time they get to a scene with the Colosseum, I think to myself, sometimes even say out loud, I've been there. So that scene, that knowledge of the Colosseum or visiting Pompeii means more to me because of the enrichment opportunities. Now, I don't think we're going to fund taking anybody to Italy, but certainly we can offer some enrichment opportunities when we talk about extending the school year and or school day. As I hit the slide, I remembered. And also providing some wraparound services. You'll hear us talk about some of the different legislation that passed that talks about reducing the ratio for counselors, adding mental health supports to buildings, which we know is important. All of those things are going to be additional things that we can add. I think on this last slide we're talking about dates. Yeah. So we've had this show's been on the road since probably September, October, but focusing on November. We went to all the board meetings. We met with Christina, Red Clay, and Brandywine. We've been back multiple times to answer questions, gather their feedback. We've now scheduled meetings like this to continue to have the conversations, to garner information so that we can make this as robust, and again, hear from the people who, what do you need? What do the students need? What do the families need? And it's not something where Jim Simmons, the governor, or any of us are saying, here's what we're going to give you. We're hoping that those districts will decide to participate, start to give permission for their superintendents to work on MOUs with us, and then by the February, March timeline, approve those MOUs to say, we're all in. We've decided that we're going to be on the right side of history and try to fix education within the city limits, with a start date later on that year, with July 1 being a traditional fiscal year to start the school year. We know that that's a short timeline, and we're not going to have everything in place by the start of the school year, but if we have things in place and continue to work and build them, almost like thinking about putting this in phases, start with this phase, add this phase as we work through those MOUs. I know I spoke relatively quickly because I knew that we wanted to save time for questions, answers, feedback, so we turn this over for, I'm going to give the mic to the governor, and certainly, but I'll answer any questions that are directed at me and or him, and anyone else who has any suggestions, we'll take those down as well. So Governor, the mic is yours.
Thank you very much, Jim. So we have people in the room. We'll invite your questions, your comments, whatever, and we'll get right to you. We got people online, YouTube and Facebook Live, and so if you could put your questions through there, we'll tee them up here and try to answer them. We take questions, we take advice, we take complaints, whatever you want to say, we're here to kind of answer your questions. One of the things that's going to come up, I can tell you, and Jim mentioned it, this is really not a top-down approach. It's really a bottom-up approach, and so people want to say, well, what's this exactly going to be? The answer to a lot of those things is, I'm not going to decide that question. That question is going to be decided by the teachers, the families, and the educators at the ground level and here in the city, with a particular focus, obviously, on the challenges that our teachers, our educators, and our families face here in the city of Wilmington. This, it's interesting, you know, today we had the celebration of the Hokuston Colored School, which we're now investing in making it into a center for equity and inclusion. And the graduates of that school were there. And they were inspirational in the way they talked about their experience. They were also pretty explicit about the negative part of their experience. As governor, I have an obligation to all the children in this city and across our state to do what's necessary so that they can be successful in school, particularly populations that historically have been discriminated against here in our state and across the country. We were actually a leader in desegregation through Brown versus Board of Education. Claymont High School, in the town where I grew up, was the first high school in the 17 segregated states to integrate. And our case that went up with Brown versus Board of Education, which we celebrated today out there at Hokuston Colored School, was the only case that was affirmed in Brown versus Board by the Supreme Court. So I say that only because we did that today, and tonight we are following through on our obligation to the children here in the city, and that's why we're here. So we invite your questions, your comments, and any advice you have. Yes, sir, in the back. And we've got a microphone going around. You can address your question to either Jim or me, or either one. We'll both take it.
Okay. Good afternoon. I am CJ. I work with Network Connect, and a lot of our focus is the youth. And so we came here tonight. I love the presentation. I think it's a great plan. My question would be, how would you decide who will be on the, I guess, trustee board? I heard that there will be like a board that will oversee all of this. So it would be like a school board election. And then how would that process work?
So the exact specifics of that we haven't finalized, but essentially there would be a board member for each of the 3 districts, and there would be parent and teacher representatives from the various areas. The city would be represented, and we're thinking about how to make those appointments. I do not think they would be elected positions. That's not what we've talked about. And so it's something that we're taking a lot of feedback on. People are saying, at our board meeting last night, at the board meeting we went to, we want a student on the board kind of thing. It's a little bit different this because this is mostly goes up to middle school, and so, but that kind of thing is the kind of input we're taking. And the superintendents, I'm sorry. So if you have a point of view on that, please share it with us so that we can make that part of our consideration. But it's a question that has come up a number of times. Other questions or comments? And if, as we're waiting, if you got anything coming online, just let us know.
Yeah, Governor, actually, we received some feedback online about the collaborative. Someone said you need a lot more teachers on this panel. They are the ones that know what needs to happen, potentially decrease the number of administrators. Don't know if you, anything on that?
Well, one thing that we know for sure is that we need more resources in the classroom, right? And that's why we've approved opportunity funding with the support of our General Assembly for all districts that goes by the number of children from low-income backgrounds and English learners so that there are more resources there. That's why we have additional resources for social, emotional learning. And that's kind of the whole concept, is to bring more resources to bear overall. You know, the districts themselves, to a certain extent, make those decisions vis-a-vis, you know, how many administrators they have and teachers. But this local board will be able to make the decisions for the collaborative. That's the whole concept. There's right behind you. There's a question.
Yes, my name is Rolanda Lang, and I listened to the presentation. I myself grew up around the corner from Governor Carney, so I live in the city now. He came and knocked on my door and invited me here. I also retired from Christina School District after working there for 31 years. I retired from Elber Palmer. And people talk about being there for years. I was there for 26 years.
God bless
That
you.
school was open for 28 years, and I was there for 26. I worked there as a paraprofessional, and then I went to Delaware State, got my degree, and I retired as a special education teacher.
So between the
And I just feel like everybody has to respect each other. The people in the schools have to respect the parents, and the parents have to respect the teachers. And we have to work together for these children. I mean, and the gentleman that talked about going to Italy, one year I worked as a special education teacher, and I had these children in what we call specialized support. Those of you that work in the district know what I'm talking about. And my children got involved in the Terracotta Warriors, and when they were in Philadelphia, and that was one of the only places in this country, I took my kids to see the Terracotta Warriors. And I bet you if you found any of those children in the city of Wilmington somewhere, they'll remember that Miss Lang took them to see the Terracotta Warriors.
Miss Lang, it's great to see you. Always good to see a clay monster.
Thank you. Thank
Between
you.
our
But what I want to ask is, the MOU, is it an MOU that's going to be different from district to district, or is it the same for all the schools, city schools?
My guess is there'll be some similarities and maybe some differences. I mean, that's
Okay.
not for me to say. That'll be a decision made with the districts themselves and
Okay.
the department. Jim, any reflection?
No, we do think that, each of the districts has their own collective bargaining agreement with their teachers, so we're going to have to work with the individual districts to create those MOUs. We certainly think there will be some similarities, some things that are in common. If we're trying to have this collaborative, we want to have some of those things in common. But we also don't want to go in prejudging those things, right? And so I think that conversation will come out as we have those conversations, as those districts decide to participate. Back to the question around teaching and engagement with families, I actually think it's probably the most important thing to the whole plan. I think that we've got to engage families, and I think we have to be creative. My office/title has the word innovation in it, and I think we've got to do some innovative things. This being one. In the history of schools, we have not come to the communities to talk to families. We oftentimes ask families to come to us and don't understand that could be a hardship. It could be an uncomfortable feeling. Again, I talk a lot about when I was the principal at Mount Pleasant, but we tried to do some creative things to invite families. So we would have our meetings at the POW Center, because that was in those communities. And so we would do those things so families felt welcome. Oftentimes, school is an intimidating place when you don't understand how everything works. So if you can come and bring that meeting to them where they're more comfortable, and I often would say my agenda has one thing: questions and answers, right? Instead of bringing an agenda to our parents, we need to come in and have them create the agenda on the spot and find out what it is that they need and want. So I think that's important. And when I say families, that includes the children. We oftentimes make decisions for kids, and we don't even know if that's what they want or need. You talked about the trip you went. If you just decided to take them and none of them wanted to go, it wouldn't have had the same impact. So I think it's important.
Well, what we did was we were reading in a magazine about them, and they wanted to learn more about them. So I would take them to the computer lab. We did a whole thing about the Terracotta Warriors. And then we found out we were going to the Franklin Institute as a school, and I found out they were going to be there. And I said, oh, that would be wonderful to take these kids to see them. And they had such a good time. And I'm sure that even to this day, most of them probably are now in middle school or maybe beginning high school. They probably remember that.
I would remove the word probably. I guarantee you they remember that, right?
Because even I was taken aback by them. It was
I think
wonderful.
what you just described was something I mentioned in a meeting earlier today. When we talk about educating students, we oftentimes give them knowledge, but we don't give them a way to apply it. And I think when you talk about standard, it's what do you know and able to do. And in that able to do, it talks about applying your knowledge. And so that's a case that you just described of applying some knowledge, something they've read, seeing it in real life, and I guarantee you it stuck with them.
Thank you for having this evening. I'm Rolanda's sister, and we are two of 12 children who lived in Claymont, and I still live in Claymont. Claymont, although it's a suburb, sometimes was within the Brandywine School District, had some of the similar concerns almost of city schools. My children graduated from Mount Pleasant High School because we hardly have any schools in 19703 in Claymont anymore. Over the years, I have been passionate about early education, wondering how to get it right from the beginning, and have been involved in former Governor Markell's Sustaining Early Success initiative, created the Claymont Community Readiness Team. And so the word collaborative is ringing with me with this equation in the readiness equation, that if a ready school and a ready community and a ready early learning provider, and one more I'm missing, those four components will equal a ready child. And so to your point about being innovative and taking the burden off of just the schools or parents in 21st century and teachers and administrators, how to think about. To me, I always wonder, in this small state, right now with our president from this state right now, in this small state that's been called small wonder, why we can't really set the tone for doing things in a more collaborative way. And I just thinking about, you talked about nonprofits, and I was fortunate enough through a change of careers to assist kindergarten at Tower Hill School before I married and had my own children, and was able to see things done very well where people have the autonomy to do things differently when they're not within the confines of our federal school system, which is very big. And so we're all doing the same things. Some people have a little more freedom to do things differently, but still want to accomplish the same goals. And so when you talked about not blaming people, also not working in silos, I would just love to see this collaborative and education all across the state of Delaware be more innovative in how we all can be working, bringing our strengths, whether we're independent schools, whether we're Brandywine School District, whether we're Christina, whether we're down in Sussex County. I would just like people to be much more innovative about how we can be all wanting the same thing for every single student in the state. And it can be very complicated. I work in the Newcastle County library system, in our beautiful library that sits on the old Brookview grounds in Claymont in the children's room as the children's room assistant. And I'm often trying to make sure the programming that we do supports the education at Claymont Elementary School, which was my high school. So it's just always trying to be very out of the box and fourth dimensional about how to accomplish what we're doing. So I would encourage people not to feel like it's only the responsibility of Wilmington or those 3 districts or a county, but just, as a state, just always be thinking innovatively about ways to accomplish our goals.
Again, always great to hear from somebody from Claymont. Between the Carney and Lang families, I think we had 2 full baseball teams at least. But to your point about early education, we have had a lot of interest from early educators in joining the collaborative, and something that we're thinking about, how would that actually work? Because you think about the preparation that Jim talked about, bringing the children into kindergarten, readier there because of their experience before kindergarten. We have made a commitment to increase the number of preschool seats, and that's going to be an important part of this initiative.
Do I need a mic?
Yes. Just for the folks on the live stream.
Oh, okay. Good evening. My name is Leslie Footman. This is my 25th or 26th year with the Christina School District, actually starting in this building in 1995. I like the idea of the collaborative, and I'm only speaking as an educator. I don't live in Delaware, I live in Pennsylvania. Because our children do move within the city from district to district, right? And the curriculum's all different. But my bigger concern is that we already know they move within the city because they can't afford to move anyplace else, right? So the collaborative in itself is nice, but I would like us to see, or like the governor or the state government, to see, like, are we addressing high poverty and family trauma and affordable housing? Because these people move, these families move from place to place because it's the only place they can afford to actually live. Our teachers, I looked at our numbers, I don't think our 30% of retention numbers are correct for the last 3 years, but John told me he was going to work on that for me, or let me know. But teachers leave because it's a lot to deal with, working in a high poverty, high trauma environment day in and day out, right? And we all do the best we can, from admin, district office, all the way up and down. I feel like until the poverty, the high poverty, the trauma that comes from being impoverished, the affordable housing, until that is addressed, I don't see much changing the situation that we're in right now, right? I feel like the students come to school every day. They want to be here. We're packed. Some of our frequent flyers, the one who have the highest amount of trauma, are here every day. Even if they're not supposed to be here, they're here every day. They love coming to school. You know, we know that parents love their children, but a lot of the trauma that we see that causes high teacher turnover and our low test scores come from children not really being ready to learn when they get here. You know, due to outside, you know, forces that some are in control, the parents have control over, some of them don't. You know, but to me, when you say city collaborative, it's almost like we already know these kids are going to stay right here. They're going to be in this part, which is Red Clay, or they're going to be in that part, which is Brandywine, but they're always going to be a part of the city. And while doing the collaborative will help them out as far as having the same curriculum, so when they move from place to place, you know, it's not a big change and gaps in their knowledge because they could be in different places on the curriculum. It's kind of like putting a Band-Aid on it, to me, you know, because until we address these other issues, our students are not going to be successful. They're not, when they come to school, for the most part, they're not ready to even receive the information that's being given to them. You know, the amount of homelessness, food insecurity, housing insecurity, parenting skills. You know, we learn a lot of parenting skills, and you're right, parents don't want to come into a building because a lot of these parents have had negative experiences themselves. So they only come to the building when they feel like their child has been treated unfairly. Other than that, you don't see them, right? So we do need to involve the parents, but I think a lot of these other issues need to be resolved, and definitely parenting education should be something that's like definitely included. And I don't know how we're going to get them here because it's a struggle. I worked at Albert Palmer with Mrs. Lang. Hi, baby, how are you? And I'm telling you, like Mrs. Gwaltney, who was FS something? She had the parents in the building every single month. She did something after school where she fed them, and we gave out books, and we had people come, and they actually came into the building, and once you get them in the building, then you can speak to their needs or whatever. We need to get like back to that so that they're really involved. If you say, here's a meeting and come learn this, they're not going to come. We have to figure it out. But this collaborative is wonderful, but until we address
100%.
poverty.
And you've just described the problem really well and the challenge. And at the same time, at the end, gave a really good solution. We can do this. I do believe we can do this. But we've got to address those problems you're talking about. We're making some progress, I would say, on the east side with our parent support unit on the top floor of Stubbs. Stubbs is now an early childhood center on the first floor, and as you probably know. So we're looking to do just what you're talking about. So that's one thing that I would say. The other thing about the issues around poverty, we have a unique opportunity right now with the federal ARPA money coming to our state and the investments that we intend to make in the city of Wilmington on the housing side to address some of the issues that you're talking about and get rid of some of the blight. It's going to, and we've already committed to do about $26 million in the redevelopment of Riverside projects. If you know that Reach Riverside, it's a whole project that runs from the old, from the bridge down there across the Brandywine all the way up through the old Riverside to the school there, what used to be Martin Luther King School. So we're going to work with the mayor to do just that, and we are kind of as we speak.
But once again, it's still a project, like for low income.
It's going to be mixed. It's going to be mixed income project. That's the whole purpose, much like what they did across Northeast Boulevard. But to your point, was we're going to, am I going to stand up here and say that we're going to erase poverty? No, but we understand that it's an important condition that requires our 100% focus on for the children that live in the city, as you have said. But they're addressed now with 3 separate school districts. This is clearly anecdotal, but I visited the teachers in Christina in a suburban elementary school, and there were about 15 of them around the table. Almost all of them had started out in the city. And one of the teachers said that she would have stayed, except that there was always a lot of turnover at the bottom because they were, I guess, had the lowest amount of tenure vis-a-vis where they could teach, which is something that we frankly addressed in the MOU. So the point is, we have teachers like you, people who are willing to make that commitment, that need our focus and need our help, and that's essentially what this is all about. Am I going to stand here and tell you it's going to be easy? No way. But I can tell you this. I can tell you this. I was just at a school in West Seaford. It's a poor area in Sussex County. And their third grade reading proficiency was significantly higher than what we're talking about. So it can be done. We know that it can be done. And I'm talking about poor, kids that live in that greater, and a lot of English learners, frankly. Sorry, I got going. Do you have any coming online?
Yeah, sure. I'll ask a question from Facebook. I believe that the teachers already know students have their issues and are willing to rise to the challenges of educating each and every one of them. In my observation, the teachers are leaving because they are discouraged. How will teachers be empowered?
Yeah, I think we just kind of addressed that, but absolutely that's the issue we're talking about. And I think when we're all in this together, when we're all providing support, when it's not just it's all support wrapping around, people feel, what did somebody say earlier? People feel supported. That's essentially what we're trying to do. Go ahead.
But that's another, when I looked at the presentation,
Yeah.
because I came prepared, when it says that we have all this additional support, what does that actually mean? Because I'm currently in a CSI school, right? And so when you say support, a lot of times it's additional coaching and meetings that the suburban schools don't have to do. So with this additional coaching, does that mean we're going to have even more meetings? Because that translates to me as like another meeting.
I'm not the right one to answer that question.
Okay.
Hey, I'll say, John Sheehan with the governor's office. I'm a huge fan of Leslie Footman. One of the things that I wanted to address this, because on Friday we had a visit that a number of folks here were on virtually, and we talked to educators in different collaboratives that are similar to what we're trying to do here. And one of the, I think, the most impactful presentations we thought was from NEA. And we heard from a lady there who talked about shared decision-making and how involving educators in key building-based decisions led to greater retention, greater student achievement, and improved morale. And so I think engaging, and that's part of the MOU process, which is going to be really important and really complicated, is to create those systems so that folks like you and like Ms. Lang who have done this work are part of the decision-making process. And that is going to have, I think, such a great impact, because what you just said, we don't want to do. We don't want to add more things to educators' plates. Mm-hmm. So I think I hope that provides clarity, because involving you in those key decision-making rooms and decisions, it's just going to be so impactful, I think, for what we can do. And so happy to share the presentation from Friday, because I just think it painted so clearly such a picture of what educator empowerment looks like and what shared decision-making looks like.
Okay. Thanks, John.
Yeah, thanks, Leslie. Good to see you again.
The other thing I'll add to that is when we looked at the educators' mobility survey and it talked about why teachers leave, I think we've got to change the question to say, why do teachers stay? And so talking to Ms. Lang in the back to find out what happened in over the span of your career that made you stay.
Yeah. You have to care about children.
What?
You can't separate them. You can't say, I'm only going to care about this group of kids. You have to care about all the children. Because, one day, we're all going to get old, and they're going to be the ones running things. And do you want them throwing us off the bridge because they don't know what the job is? I mean, you have to love those kids, and you have to do what you can do for them. I feel as though that my time in Christina School District, I gave my all to those children. I would go to work in the dark and come home in the dark because my kids were grown, but I loved those children. I go knock on people's doors. If a child gave me a hard time, because I know my way around the city of Wilmington, I go knock on your mama's door and tell them. And they come to school the next day, apologize, and do what they needed to do. I guess I'm kind of old school because I am older. So I looked at that. You have to look at people as, no, it may not be the greatest place that they live or how their parents are. I had to look beyond that and say, I'm doing this because I know your child can do better. They don't need to act like this in school. So, and I would tell the kids, I would go knock on your mama's door, and I did it quite a few times. Because the parents would know that I cared about their child, because I'm not gonna say, oh, I need to write you up, you need to be suspended. I'm gonna call mom and put mom on the phone with you and let mom talk to you. Ask mom to come in and talk to me and say, how can we together work for your child? That's how I got through, and that's why I stayed for 31 years. I didn't spend all 31 at Elbert Palmer because it wasn't open that long. I've worked here, I've worked at Douglas, I worked lots of places, but like people are saying, sometimes you get moved around because you don't have the tenure. And like I said, once I did have the tenure, I stayed at Elbert Palmer until I retired in 2018. I stayed there for 26 years. But I love the children.
And also as an older person, and as we were driving here, I thought, where is the generation who went through what we went through when the court order mandate for DSEG, whether you lived in the suburbs and had to go to the city, whether you lived in the city and had to go to the suburbs, where are they? Are they still living in this state? What was their experience? Was it good? Was it bad? Do they have did they benefit from going somewhere, and can they bring some of that experience? And they need to be some of the people, wherever they are, if they're sitting as the CEO of some corporate office, or whether they went back into education, some of them need to be, because they've been through. Or did they raise? I had my children later on. My sister had her children when she was younger, and she's 6 years older than I am. I had my kids older. They've just graduated out of Brandywine School District, and I had to take a history lesson. I said, what happened in public school from the time I graduated until I came back to the same buildings? My children went through some of the same buildings that were there. And so I was reading books in the library trying to understand what happened. And so you just have a different perspective, but you take all of that and you bring that to the table to help solve some of these 21st century issues. You have to have some of the history of how we got where we are, if you went through it, how you benefited or didn't benefit from it, if you were ripped out of your inner city schools and put somewhere else. So I'm very curious to know where some of the people in our generation are, and whether they're in education or anywhere else. If they're in the state, what would they bring to this collaborative to help make some of this work? Well, you chose to be the governor of our state, to stay here and want to be the governor of our state. There was a reason that you wanted to do that with your life.
Yeah, the last 20 months I've wondered that question. But it's a great point. And I think what I would say, and I've talked to a lot of people, advocates on every side you could talk about. Most people here don't know, but my father spent the largest part of his career as a teacher, guidance counselor, administrator in the old Wilmington Public School District. So I lived through, as a junior high and high school student, the early 70s all the way through to desegregation. And I remember talking to my dad often about it. And at the time when he was first working for the district, it was connected to the city of Wilmington, city council. He used to always argue, I guess I can mention Leo Marshall, who's passed away, but Leo was the political power in the city from this neighborhood, by the way. And he was the clerk of city council, and he ruled with an iron fist. And my dad would always come home and complain that he was in charge of special services. He and Ted Blunt worked together, and after DSEG, Ted took his position, and my dad had this similar position in Brandywine. But all these supports that he was trying to get for the city of Wilmington, for the Wilmington School District, were being denied. He used to rail on about Leo Marshall, and he wasn't able to get these services that he thought were necessary. So this is, and everybody you talk to, and I've had people, when I first was elected, I brought all the superintendents in. They're all different now. And members of the board, because the WIC proposal had just failed in the General Assembly, which would have redistricted the state, those school districts in the city of Wilmington. And my approach was to try to get some consensus around what we should do. Well, it became very clear that we weren't going to get a consensus. And so we made a decision based on Dr. Bunding's assessment of the schools in the city that we would focus on Christina, Palmer, and Stubbs, and Bancroft, and Bayard, and Pulaski. Because every day that goes by and we don't do something, or every year that goes by, the children that were in kindergarten and first grade when I was first elected, they're in fifth grade now, fourth and fifth grade. The point is, we cannot wait and come up with one more excuse or this excuse why we can't do this. We can do it. Not only can we do it, we have an obligation to do it, as you say, because these are our children. And if we thought of it that way, if we thought about it that these are our children, then I think we would be more open to embracing good ideas that have been tried in other parts of the country that essentially say we're all going to work, we're all in this together, and we're going to make it work because we know it can work. I've seen it work in our state. I'm sorry, I got a little off your question, but there are people out there. We had a group that met with lots of Wilmington education advocates that have been doing this work for 30 years. And they all have very strong opinions about every issue that's related to it. We don't need three. The court ordered that the city be separated into 4 districts. Initially it was one big district because the state didn't come up with their own proposal. And so then it evolved into the 4 districts, et cetera, and we are where we are today. That's the past. We need to understand that past in order to move forward. But we're moving forward. And the only way to move forward is to embrace ideas that work and to really provide hyper-focus on the needs of these children, because they're our children. Please.
Hi, I have just a couple questions. The first 2 are about something that I saw in the slideshow. So could you speak more to the community councils that was on one of the slides, please?
Hey, Stephanie.
Hi, John.
Good to see you. So at each school, as a part of what we've seen elsewhere, they have community councils of community leaders, families, students, to help advise on key decisions. And one of the conversations the governor referenced that we spoke to advocates about is helping to define like a clear role. So it's guidance on what the community needs and how we can make these schools true community schools and true community hubs, but also seeing like what decision making we should consider to have shared with folks in the community. So it's a defined council at each school of community leaders, families, parents, students, to help advise on decisions, help make schools reflective of community desires.
And so much like the gentleman in the back, how would those community councils be staffed? Like who would decide who participates on those councils?
Yeah, it would certainly be a school level decision on how, I mean, we would want to make those very inclusive. I think of it as like much larger than like a few people. And as far as staffing, we've talked, and this is again going to be something that we want to rely on the collaborative for, but things like, you know, a community schools person or a family resource person at schools or as part of the collaborative to help work with those bodies.
Okay, thanks. So can we then talk to the Teach Wilmington Fund that was also on the slide, and it mentioned innovative recruitment. I know you talked about labor management partnership as a way to retain teachers, but I know that educators are in high demand, but there are very few of them. So what kind of innovative recruitment are we talking about when there are not enough educators to fill the jobs we have now?
Yeah, I have a few ideas, and I'll share those. I just want to say, like, as part of this collaborative, I would want to hear from folks who are in these buildings as we sort of build those out. So happy to share some of the things we've talked about. I think engaging our higher eds with partnerships to develop pipelines and really lean into some of the great teacher residency work that we've started, thanks to folks like Representative Dorsey Walker in the General Assembly. We've been able to allocate funding to establish a residency program across the state. And so really developing pipelines and working with higher eds, looking at programs that help recruit folks to be education support professionals and develop a pipeline so that those folks get a path into teaching. So those are a few things we've talked about, but again, I would certainly want to lean on your expertise as a classroom teacher, Leslie's expertise, to make sure that we're building this together. But huge point, and something we heard from both Christina, or Red Clay, and Brandywine on our calls with them.
And then can we jump to funding? So I know that you mentioned opportunity funds, Governor, but where could we be thinking about other ways to fund this Wilmington Learning Collaborative?
Yeah, great question.
I guess that's maybe the Teach Wilmington Fund, but I'm not sure. Operation costs, day-to-day costs.
So a few answers to that. One is opportunity funding ramping up to $60 million a year, thanks to the support of a number of folks in this room, including DSEA, House Bill 100, adding guidance counselors and behavioral health staff. Additionally, the K-3 bill that, again, broad support from folks in this room to add staff. And then additionally, as part of the governor's recommended budget, adding additional funding for a lot of these things. And again, want to work with folks on the ground to see how the best way to use those resources would be.
And then when we talk about school leaders, are we thinking about the leaders who are already in these schools? Are we thinking about maybe branching out? I don't want to really, I mean, how do we make sure that we're doing the best for our students when we're thinking about the school leaders? I know that educators, much like the educator in the back, she didn't leave because she loved her children. Educators don't leave because they work, with the children. They leave because of the leadership. So how are we going to think about the leadership that we need to run these schools effectively?
Yeah, I think one of the things, and we have a lot of principals in this room who know this work better than I, but really looking at the supports that we're providing to those folks and the innovative practices and coaching and leadership development. I'm going to turn it over a little bit to our principal here to talk a little more about that, but that's got it. The talent management piece, leaning into supporting educators and supporting school leaders, has to be a key component of this.
And are we thinking about what we're currently doing now, or are we thinking about branching out? Because I know what we do now, I know the programs we have now, but are you thinking about looking outside of what Delaware does to other states or other programs who might be doing something a little bit differently?
So I think we have to look at those other things, but I also think that what we've done traditionally around leadership is we've promoted the people who have been there the longest, and we haven't prepared them or given them the opportunity to grow. And I think we've got to do a better job of that. I don't think, and maybe I'm overly optimistic. I think everybody goes in with the right intention, and sometimes they're not completely prepared. So I think we've got to look at how are we preparing principals. And again, I don't know that I got it right all the time, but I tried to keep in mind that I was always a teacher who was on a special assignment to be an administrator. And so my focus was always on supporting teachers. I think we've got to do a better job of preparing. And so when I was a principal, I tried to talk to my assistants to say, we're going to do it this way because, and you would learn these different things. And I don't know that we have a system in place to do that. What I do know is there's not a long line of people trying to get those jobs either. So we've got to do a better job of working with the people who are willing to do those jobs in the system, giving them training. I think we need a principal mentorship program. I was extremely fortunate when I became the principal of Mount Pleasant that we had an acting superintendent, Andy Brandenberger, who was outgoing, and he volunteered to be my mentor. So I had someone to help me with those questions I don't know. I don't want to pick on anybody, any principal in the room or district, but I think if we don't give those opportunities to folks repeatedly, then we're going to ending up in the same situation that we are. So we've got to change the structure. The second piece I'll add is that for a long time, principals were asked to be managers, and now they're asked to be instructional leaders, but we didn't change how we trained them to be instructional leaders. So I think we've got to look at that as well. So, but again, I think it's not for Jim Simmons or the governor or John to decide. I think it's for, as we talked about before, working from the bottom up, telling us what you need. And so I think that goes leaps and bounds. The young lady who presented on Friday from the NEA, her research and data showed that when teachers are involved, retention rates went way up, involvement went way up, test scores went way up. So that didn't happen by accident.
I understand that. And then my last question would be, and I know that you have been talking about the Coalition of the Willing. And so my question is, what happens if the districts decide they don't want to be a part of the coalition? What happens to the schools and what happens to the students and the educators if a district decides it doesn't want to participate in the collaborative? And that's just the worst case scenario.
Yeah, in the job I have over the last 2 years, you got to be an optimist. So I'm hoping for the best, praying for the best. I believe that people want to do the right thing by these children. I don't believe that anybody goes to work any day, every day, not thinking about that. We just have to put them in systems where they can be successful. And I believe that the school boards will want to do the right thing. If they don't, then we'll have to kind of reassess where we are, but we still have a memorandum of understanding with the Christina School District, and we will continue. We will work with whoever is willing to work with us to provide additional resources, additional focus to help these children. And I believe everybody has the right intention to want to help these children, and that hopefully they'll see this. And I think I'll have to ask the question, okay, if not this, then what? What's
Right,
your
I'm just
plan?
asking because I know that some people believe that what they're doing is already best practiced, and, they're doing the
I get
best that they
that.
can. So, if they decide as a school board, this is not for them, I just want to know what comes next. So I understand that
Yeah,
you're maybe not ready for that, though.
I guess we'll cross that bridge if we come to it.
Thank you.
So, Julie DeHodge from DSEA. I represent all the teachers and parents in Christina district. And they have been through so many different attempts to do this. What makes this different to them? How can we help them understand that this is different than what all the other attempts have been? One of the concerns that I've been hearing is the timeline. It seems to be very short. And what makes this different that it will work this time? And how do we create that trust to make it work this time?
Well, first of all, I'd say I approach this, we used to have a slide that showed the timeline. And I approach it with a sense of urgency that I mentioned earlier. I'm already frustrated that we're not further along than I wanted us to be when we started out this 4 years ago. And I don't want to waste time tonight, wringing my hands about that. But as Jim or John said earlier, we don't have to do everything all at once. And frankly, it's going to take time for people for the system to gain the trust that you're talking about. I think it's going to take some time to demonstrate that this is not just another fad. Unlike the others, which were, as Jim said, we're doing things to people, not with people. This approach is to do it with people. And so I think that we'll be able to get that support, that trust that you're talking about. I think that's a really good concept because it is going to take that. I've seen schools, when I was lieutenant governor, I spent a lot of years, we ran a program we called Models of Excellence. And we make it available to schools across our state, almost like the Superstars program. But we had different metrics that we used. And I could walk into a school and observe, and I'm not an educator. I was raised by two, but I'm not one myself. And you can tell the difference. And it's really about a chemistry, trust being right at the core of it. And the instructional leader, the principal, the assistant principals, all working together as a team. And everybody aligned, knowing. I'll never forget going to East Millsboro Elementary School and walking around with a guy by the name of Gary Brittingham. And Gary knew every child's name in the school and what the reading proficiency level was. Because he took me back to his office and he showed me. And this was before all the sophisticated tools that we have now. And I've seen other schools like that. I mentioned the Seaford schools that we've been into recently. And so we know that it can be done, but it does take the kind of trust. It will take step by step. We don't have to jump in and do everything all at once. It's not going to work that way, right? That's not the way we've done it with our current memorandum of understanding with Christina. We've moved into it to gain the trust that you're talking about. It's not going to work without that kind of buy-in. And that's why it is really a bottom-up. It's working with, not to. It's not an imposed takeover. Some of the ones that you saw on the thing, if you participated, were that. That's not what this is.
So I was just going to add on to what Julie said, because trust is going to be really important. The Bayard staff, those of us that are still here, this is our third year in our second MOU. We have one more year. We know that we're a CSI school, and being a CSI school, we have DOE walk through and visit our buildings twice a month, one for reading, ELA, and then one for math. And speaking to my peers in the suburbs, they don't have half the meetings or requirements that the CSI schools have. And personally, I feel like it's almost like saying I'm not doing my job. Like if you have to come to my classroom and talk to my students and pull the stuff out their desk and ask them what they're learning, to personally, and I know I've talked to many people. I've talked to Mrs. Wallace, I've talked to Mr. Cahoon, I've talked to Dr. Joyner, you know, and they're like, no, that's not what it is, that's not what it is. But as an educator on the front lines, that's what it feels like. When you ask my student, what are you learning? When you're digging in their desk, when you're coming over and you're listening to me talk in a small group and engage with a student. And so as of right now, I can probably tell you, matter of factly, that a lot of teachers are going to be transferring out of city schools. Because it just feels like we do that much more, so much more than is required of other schools that are in our district. And I don't think that necessarily I'm not pointing fingers at district office, I'm not pointing fingers at admin or whatever. I know that we're a CSI school, I know things have to be done, but in what other profession does somebody walk to your room? They don't do it to doctors, police officers, lawyers. Nobody comes around and checks to see if you're doing your job correctly, right? We already have observations, announced and unannounced observations. So with these additional walkthroughs, you know, personally, it doesn't make me feel good. And I know that with this additional coaching or help, or we also have UDL, you know, so that's a meeting, a planning meeting, a visit where they come and observe your lesson. Then there's a reflection meeting where they tell you, you know, the things you did well and maybe some suggestions or some things you could have done differently. Like what other profession is critiqued in that way? You know, and I think this is year 3. People are tired of being critiqued. When I can just transfer to leisure or Marshall or whatever, that doesn't have to go through this process. So some changes are going to have to be made. Teachers that work in the city love working in the city. If they wanted to leave, especially tenured teachers that have left a long time ago, they love working here. What we don't love is doing all the extra things that other teachers don't have to do.
So So I think it's a couple ways to approach it. So I went to a school that we were never, I was a principal of a school that we weren't CSI, but we had a SIG grant and we did those things. And I'll start by saying this, presentation matters, right? Would you rather have egg, flowers, and milk or chocolate cake? And so the way that that work is presented to you determines, I would argue that some of those things that you described need to happen everywhere. You said, what profession does that happen? I'd argue what gets monitored gets done. And so I'll use an old football adage. I'm an old football guy. And so what happens is there's walking around and there's monitoring, and those teams that do that, those teams win. When I was the football coach, I argued that I was the best defensive back coach in the state of Delaware. Maybe I was egocentric, I don't know. But I listened to my coaches who said that drills are better when the head coach is watching. And we became a better football team by me moving around and watching the linemen, watching the linebackers. We got better because what they were doing was now getting monitored by the person who they knew was making the decision. Now, critiqued and monitored is two different things, right? And so I think the feedback piece matters, and how it's presented makes a difference to all of that, right?
So when you get an observation from your administrator, that doesn't suffice?
I'm not saying that that doesn't suffice. What I'm saying is,
Monitoring, they also do walkthroughs, that's monitoring, right?
yes,
And then you
it
get
is.
evaluation, and you get the evaluation, right? So the people who work closely with you can say what you're doing and what you're not doing, correct? So then you have another level, because UDL comes out of University of Delaware, and apparently it was a grant given by the state for the Access Project, and so you have them coming in, and you're meeting with them, I think it's once a month, then a planning meeting, and then you get an observation, and then you get a reflection meeting, and then you have DOE on top of that comes through twice a month, one for ELA and one for math. Like, when does it stop? Like, I'm an educator, I have a master's plus 15 degrees and 25 years experience. It's upsetting to me. Because it implies that I'm not doing my job.
So again, I think that's the presentation. I don't think that that's the intent, that you're not doing your job, right? And so again, I would argue this. Spin it the other way, right? I've been in situations where a parent would call me and say, Mr. Carney is a terrible teacher, he's not doing X, Y, and Z. And I can either say, well, I was in his room one time last year to do his formal evaluation, or I can say, I've been in Mr. Carney's room 7, 10, 12 times this year, and I assure you that the things that he's doing are not those things. And so leaders, I see a couple around the room, should be in those rooms, and sometimes that means other people. So if someone were to call me, I could say, I've been in is it Freeman? Footman. I've been in Miss Footman's room because I'm at DOE, so I guarantee you that what she's saying she's doing is happening. So I think that instead of putting a negative spin on it and we're doing extra, I would argue that that's what it should look like across the board.
Because right now, it's just the city teachers doing it, and we have enough to do.
So again, we can certainly have this conversation offline. I know that. No.
I'm just telling you how I feel.
I understand, and so I don't want to take up the whole meeting with you and I, but I just think that I think presentation matters, I think expectations matter, and I think all of those things impact the way you feel about what's happening. So I think that goes a long way.
All right. To build off of a bit of an earlier conversation we have a question from YouTube. What supports will be given to parents to help educate them and improve their home environments to impact the effects of poverty? A healthcare system at the schools is needed, but what else?
Well, again, all I can relate to is what we are doing now in our MOU with Christina, some of the things that we're planning in the new school at Bancroft, and ideas that the local board might come up with to address whatever issues around poverty. Are we going to end poverty? No. Are we going to try to address the conditions of poverty that affect the learning of our students? Absolutely. Again, for me to stand here and say, here's exactly what we're going to do, I think is not the point. The point is, those are the kinds of things that we expect from the people who understand the dynamics there and what the needs of those children are. We like the concept, and I don't know, I won't speak for the district, but we like the concept of the dual gen center. We have one on the east side, and we'd like to see one on the west side. We like the idea of engaging. I know Maria Matos is very interested in engagement and has been engaged here with Pulaski. We have a lot of English learners on this side of town. Obviously, that's the nature of her community center. There are lots of those kinds of partnerships. We're talking about a wellness center on the east side in the new Bancroft. So those are starting points. But again, what are the needs? Tell us what the children and the families need. It's not for me to stand up here and say, here's what they need and here's what we're going to do. That's been one of the more difficult things about selling the concept. People want me to tell them what we're going to do, and that's not the way it works. It works, again, from the bottom up and engaging parents and teachers and educators and working as a team. Jim, anything on that?
We have another question from Beth on Facebook. Actually, it's sort of a comment of support. She said, yes, trauma-informed schools and classrooms are imperative. Do you have anything else on trauma-informed care?
Yeah, no, just that I would just observe that one of the first things that we did with this, it was called the Office of Innovation there, an improvement when Darrell Green was in Jim's position, was to do district-wide social-emotional learning seminars and work with the teachers on all of that. And obviously, that's something that's necessary. We've heard from the teachers about the children that they. I had an experience with it that was really kind of by happenstance. John's heard me tell this story, and others too. We were walking. We were in Harlan, and we were going classroom to classroom, and I sat down next to a little second grader, I think. I always get the grade wrong. And all the little girl could think about was the fact that her father wasn't home and he was supposed to come up from Georgia and blah, blah, blah. She was just completely out of sorts because of this disruption in her family situation. It was all she could think about. Of course, I didn't not quite know what to do, but I went to the teacher afterwards. I talked to this little girl, and she, took care of it. But so there are these kinds of issues that are impeding the ability of our students to learn. I also mentored a little boy at Warner when I was lieutenant governor, and he was always disturbed by this dog that was always barking. He lived in a row house over on like 28th and just off Market Street. Constantly, I'd be there for, an hour, and he'd spend 15 minutes talking about the dog barking and the disruption, so obviously affected emotionally by what was happening. He actually was a success story. His mother was got a job eventually as an aide over there at Warner, and he did quite well after that. Anything else on we're way over time, but if there are any other questions or comments. Again, Dan, thank you for you and the district for allowing us to use Pulaski. Thank you to everyone here that's joined us tonight for your input. Those who've joined us online, Facebook Live and YouTube, we appreciate. We have somebody have the schedule. John, can you? So tonight's December 14th. We're here at Pulaski. December 16th, we're over at my neighborhood in Warner. The 20th at Harlan. And the 21st, we're over at Bancroft again. So please join us. Those of you who are here, you're welcome. Those who are joining us online, and we'll be out handing out flyers and knocking on doors to do the same and try to get folks. We've already done some door knocking. We have a team doing it out in the southeast 9th Ward there, just across the street across Washington Street from where I live, and most of those children go to Warner. So thanks for joining us. God bless you. We'll see you next time.